Welcome to the film room where we're going to break down the pack line defense and take a look at Virginia's national championship run and how this system made them the best defensive team in the country. I decided to make this a two-part video so I could fully explain all four parts of this defense. So in part one, we're going to talk about what the pack line is and why do they force the ball middle, and then in part two, you'll see what they do on ball screens and how they guard in the post. Now, this defense had success back in the 90s when it was run at Wisconsin Green Bay by Tony Bennett's dad, Dick Bennett. The philosophy was that there's an imaginary line 16 feet away from the basket that every defender not guarding the ball needs to be on or inside of while applying great ball pressure at all times. And the purpose was to take away dribble penetration. So anytime someone wanted to drive their man, there was going to be people in gap help or in the pack waiting for them. So if you're an off-ball defender, your responsibility is to be on or inside that 16-foot line about halfway between your man and the ball, being in the pack, so if somebody were to drive your gap, you can stunt to stop the drive and still recover back to your man while always applying pressure on anyone trying to get to paint. Think of it like ultimate help defense. You're either on the ball or you are in the pack. You'll see here that Kyle Guy starts to get extended and then works his way right back into the pack. So as the on-ball pressure forces the ball handler to want to drive, the pack defenders make it difficult for him to get anywhere, and that's what led to teams shooting such low percentages against Virginia. So then the question becomes, why do you force the ball to the middle? You'll notice that in the majority of these closeouts from Virginia, that everybody is closing out with their outside hand out and their feet shaded slightly towards the middle, influencing the ball handler to drive middle. And the reason for that is because that's where the pack is. When Virginia forces middle drives, their stunts and their pack help force the offensive player to pick the ball up early and shoot bad shots or be out of control. And if the offense has bad spacing, it makes it that much easier for the defense. As this player goes to drive, you can see that there is no room because there's gap help on both sides and great ball pressure. And that leads to a drive with no plan and no space that turns into a bad shot. But this requires defenses to play on a string. If this ball gets driven middle, you have to be in a gap, and then this backside defender has to be prepared to stunt for the stunter if the ball gets swung. And there are critiques that this is a lazy or a conservative defense, but when it's done correctly, it is everything but conservative, because off-ball defenders have to be prepared to be in two places at once all the time. Now, when it comes to being in a gap and stunting, there are two different ways you can do this, and typically it's based off of personnel. You can either do what's called stunt and hold, which means you're going to be in that gap and then react to the ball handler and wait to see what he decides, or you can recover right after your stunt, and this is typically what you do when you're guarding someone who can shoot. Your only focus is getting the ball handler to pick it up and get back to your man, and you leave everything else to the rim protection and the on-ball defender. So the way that you know that this defense is firing on all cylinders is because of two things. Ball handlers are consistently driving into a crowd, and the offense is consistently taking heavily contested jump shots. Now, for the offense to constantly be driving into a crowd, it starts with ball pressure. The on-ball defender has to make his matchup feel uncomfortable, sped up, or even that he has an easy opportunity to drive past him, not understanding that that's exactly what the defense wants. And the other half of the equation is just as important. Defenders who are off the ball have to be in the pack, in a stance, and ready for that dribble penetration. When they drive, they need to see bodies and feel uncomfortable. And something that Virginia does so well is they trust their help so much that they are very good at guarding the ball without fouling, knowing that the pack pressure is going to force them to make bad decisions, and they just need to be solid. Now, this video wouldn't be worth much if we didn't talk about the weaknesses of pack line, because there are vulnerabilities. And I think the most obvious one is kick out threes. Because pack line defenders start and help, they are waiting to stunt at dribble penetration, and then it's a foot race with the ball to close out to their matchup. Now, the reason for starting in that gap makes complete sense. It's easier to start in one spot and know you only have to move one direction back to your man rather than lunging at dribble penetration and then trying to get your momentum going back to the perimeter to your matchup. And players can get good at this over time, but it definitely is a vulnerability. And one of the ways to eliminate that vulnerability is to anticipate the closeout. As an off-ball defender, you're already in help by being in the pack, so you need to be ready every second of the possession to close out to your man if the ball's thrown to them with a high hand ready to contest. And I don't know this for certain, but I believe this is the foundation of this defense, that you only have to move one direction if you start in the pack in help, and that eliminates a lot of guesswork for you as an off-ball defender. But one of the keys you can take from Virginia is this tip: be in a stance. You'll notice that these off-ball defenders from Virginia are constantly in a stance off the ball because they know by anticipating their closeout that they're going to force heavily contested jump shots, which is what led them to giving up low 50s game in and game out this entire championship run. So a great term to use to do this well is move on the flight of the ball. Defenders should be trying to beat the ball to their matchup, and that's going to help with their closeouts. But as I said, this is a weakness and a vulnerability, so even though they sent the ball back to the pack, they didn't do a great job of rotating on the ball and cracking back, and they gave up an easy dunk. And the second way that this defense is vulnerable is giving up baseline drives. You've seen a number of clips of guys driving to the middle and running into a crowd, but when it comes to baseline penetration, there's typically one primary help defender. And if he's not paying attention or he's out of position, that's where these easy buckets come from. Now, Virginia is very disciplined and rarely gives these up, but when teams run certain actions like this Iverson play, it can be difficult to get over those two screens and then jump to the low side, which opens up these baseline drives. And the same is true for drives that come from the slot. On this dribble penetration, the defender in the corner is trying to stunt, but he has to recover back to his shooter in the corner, so it puts a lot of stress on this rim protector to rotate over and make sure they don't give up layups. And typically this drive is open in the first place because that pack defender is stunting on middle penetration and he's late rotating over, and this is something that good teams will try and exploit, so you have to make sure you work on these baseline rotations. And one of the reasons that Virginia's defense was so elite this year is because they did have rim protectors who could come over and block these shots. So now you have a baseline understanding of the foundations of pack line defense. So whether you run this defense or you're playing against it, now you know what the best team in the country looked like running it. Make sure you check out Part B, where I break down the ball screen coverage that Virginia runs to go along with pack line and the important keys in their post defense. Thanks for coming through. We'll see you next time in the film room.